It's a new year, which is supposed to be a time of reinvention, when we all do a life audit to check if this life is indeed meeting our standards and expectations. But if your self-helpy algorithm is anything like mine, then reinventing yourself has been on your mind for far longer than the beginning of 2024. In fact, it's like it never really stops being a good time to sit down and take control and become an entrepreneur of our own lives anymore. Which, a lot of it, I think, is informative and good and helps promote good habits in my life and is also a part of the human project, right? But I also can't help but wonder, will I ever feel accomplished or content even? And what am I losing from spending so much time trying to become a better version of myself? And if I didn't want to do it anymore, is there even an alternative? Can you stop self-helping?
I believe in taking care of myself, in a balanced diet, and a rigorous exercise routine.
Is there anything rougher than when you feel like you haven't progressed in a year?
Once you can visualize those big dreams of yours, you can put your head down and you can make those things happen if you're willing to put in the work.
You want to become a whole new you and step into that better version of yourself.
After I remove the ice pack, I use a deep pore cleanser lotion. In the shower, I use a water-activated gel cleanser. Then a honey almond body scrub.
North Star that you can design for yourself, point yourself towards.
Reinventing yourself is 100% totally doable, and it might even be easier than you think.
This is what you can do every day to start a new, better
Then
life.
I apply an herb mint facial mask.
You can reinvent yourself.
Transcend your past limitations, upgrading your beliefs and behaviors that align with a reinvented version
Some kind
of
of
you.
abstraction. But there is no real me, only an entity, something illusory. And though I can hide my cold gaze, and you can shake my hand and feel flesh gripping yours, and maybe you can even sense our lifestyles are probably comparable, I simply am not there.
I think it's fair to start with doing a little checkup on how the self-help industry is doing.
No, I own you! No, I own you! I count to 3. Let's clap together on 3. Go crazy. 1, 1, 2, 3.
According to some market research, over 55% of American adults are interested in personal development and turning to podcasts as one of the main resources. The global self-help market is estimated to be worth around $41.2 billion in 2023, and the self-help industry is among the top 10 fastest-growing industries on the internet. So, the self-help industry is obviously booming. People want help, more than ever, to be better. There are obvious critiques to be thrown at this industry. A lot of them are basic snake oil accusations, of course, and just general scams. But there are also a lot of self-help people who are doctors or otherwise peer-reviewed specialists and who are genuine and don't scam people. But even if you did only get advice and improvement from highly esteemed professionals, would there still be an issue then? I'd argue, yeah, that self-help is not what it seems to be, that it's what Slavoj Zizek would call an ideology. I think he'd say that what we conceive as freedom in a concept of self-help actually ends up being exactly what traps us. You're free to do anything, but not really. It's not really acceptable to not self-help yourself when there's self-help available. It's another neoliberal lie in that sense. Before it was be good or go to hell. Don't steal, don't lie, don't cheat, work hard, preferably be rich. But still, if you're a peasant, also know that you're never going to be rich. But now, if you're a peasant, you'll be told that there's nothing standing in between you and the king except for your lack of dedication to improving your well-being and mental state, and not buying a red light therapy device. You're not a peasant, you're just middle class. And if that's the case, then the American dream is available to you as well. You just gotta work hard enough for it. You just gotta stop your bad habits and become a more productive human being and a better person, and you'll be closer to it. If you look at this from a philosophical, historical perspective, I'd argue that this self-help hell is in so many ways a natural conclusion of the existentialist project. When there was a clear rejection of God and acceptance of secular and scientific ideals in a post-war Europe-US, the question of what is the point of all of this arose yet again, as it had so many times in history before. But when they were stepping away from the idea that there was an ordained truth or a fate that people were born into as babies, we're left with questions of, well, what does it mean to be? And who are you? And why are you at all? And according to Sartre, the most popular, probably an influential existentialist philosopher of his time, you're free to choose. Yourself needs a project, and you have a motivation for being that is intrinsic, sure, but you're free to choose whatever you'd like to be. And the real issue is remaining authentic and not choosing a path that was picked by or projected onto you by people or institutions through self-deception. Man, first of all, exists, encounters himself, surges up in the world, and defines himself afterwards. If man, as the existentialist sees him, is not definable, it is because, to begin with, he is nothing. He will not be anything until later, and then he will be what he makes of himself. Now, I'm not going to suggest that the project of trying to be for itself and nothing else is an easy one or something that should be dismissed as, toxically unhealthy, nor that this isn't still being figured out on the daily. But I do observe that enthusiasm for the self as a project is something that has become perverse on some level in today's society. Obviously, this has also been brought forth not only by existentialist ideals, but by tools that we use to compare ourselves to others, like social media, where we can see what everyone else is doing, and you combine that with the natural human tendency to improve and to wish to get along with, as well as ahead of the group. And, it's easy to see how this is doomed to be kind of a shitty place where you never feel like you're enough and you always feel like you should be improving. But there's something a little more profound and also sinister going on here. It's not just about wanting to look good or be good for vanity's sake or to seem good to your friends on social media. At least I reject this notion that seemingly every New Yorker op-ed wants us to believe. It's not just about smoke and mirrors and us having to care less about pretty and petty things and be more substantial. I think self-help is about survival. Survival in a hyper-competitive, globalized, and increasingly unequal economy. Workers have fewer and fewer options, and we're being told left and right that we will be replaced by AI or another robot, and it's proving to be true. We're forced to be marketable, to be better, smarter, more creative, more productive, happier, peaceful, burnout-proof, and to seem nicer and nicer now that who you are online will also to some extent be an extension of who you are professionally and will be available to all the people potentially hiring you. But of course, we're not only self-helping to be better workers, we're self-helping because people are feeling increasingly uneasy. People's mental health is plummeting. We know something isn't right? But how can that be when everything that our parents told us that we needed and would want, we have? I agree with Mark Fisher and the psychologist Gabor Mate that a lot of the unhappiness that we tend to prescribe to poor parenting or generational quirks or individual conditions are actually symptoms of the world that we have set up for ourselves and the future generations. Capitalist realism insists on treating mental health as if it were a natural fact, like weather. But then again, weather is no longer a natural fact so much as a political economic effect. In the 1960s and 1970s, radical theory and politics, Lang, Foucault, Deleuze-Guattari, etc., coalesced around the extreme mental conditions such as schizophrenia, arguing, for instance, that madness was not a natural but a political category. But what is needed now is a politicization of much more common disorders. Indeed, it is their very commonness which is the issue. In Britain, depression is now the condition that is most treated by the NHS. In his book, The Selfish Capitalist, Oliver James has convincingly posited a correlation between rising rates of mental distress and the neoliberal mode of capitalism practiced in countries like Britain, the USA, and Australia. In line with James's claims, I want to argue that it is necessary to reframe the growing problem of stress and distress in capitalist societies. Instead of treating it as incumbent on individuals to resolve their own psychological distress, instead that is of accepting the vast privatization of stress that has taken place over the last 30 years, we need to ask, how has it become acceptable that so many people, and especially so many young people, are ill? The mental health plague in capitalist societies would suggest that instead of being the only social system that works, capitalism is inherently dysfunctional and that the cost of it appearing to work is very high. Even though the picture of the motivation behind self-improvement that I just painted might seem grim, I'm also guessing that many people's reaction would be more to say, like, oh well, c'est la vie. Maybe this is true, sure, but if we just medicate the depressed and the anxiety sufferers, wouldn't we then solve the issue and we can still, maintain this system? But philosopher Byung-Chul Han has published works that I think also further delve into the more profound and existentialist, yet important losses of this trend, and that is love and connection, and the ability to live an actual authentic life. He writes in Psychopolitics, as the entrepreneur of its own self, the neoliberal subject has no capacity for relationships with others that might be free of purpose. Nor do entrepreneurs know what purpose-free friendships would even look like. Originally, being free meant being amongst friends. Freedom and friendship have the same root in Indo-European languages. Fundamentally, freedom signifies a relationship. A real feeling of freedom occurs only in a fruitful relationship when being with others brings happiness. But today's neoliberal regime leads to utter isolation, and as such, it does not really free us at all. Accordingly, the question now is whether we need to redefine freedom, to reinvent it, in order to escape from the fatal dialectic that is changing freedom into coercion. This idea that everything we do needs to be purpose-driven directly negates concepts like relationships and, in general, living, because we are too hung up on getting things. On viewing every person, even ourselves, like a means to an end, we forego precisely what is freedom and love. And that is not to say that in a natural state of mind you should never improve or you would never feel inclined to become a better person. You would, but it wouldn't be the standard, right? Like it wouldn't be something that you're constantly thinking about and always weighing all your time up against. For Han, neoliberalism merely exploits freedom. And I myself have admittedly seen episodes of 90s sitcoms and thought to myself that this world where the characters just live together with their friends and just have fun all the time seems like my version of a nightmare. There is this toxic, productively obsessed part of me that inherently feels threatened on some level by groups of friends, because I'm afraid that participating in this type of relationship will mean that my time will somehow go to waste. I will sit around with my friends and, God forbid, do nothing, because I'll be content to simply be in their presence. I've spoken about finding it hard to make real friends nowadays, but perhaps as well, a small part of me doesn't really want to, or fears what would happen if I did, because that would take away precious time that I could spend improving myself or reaching some goal or whatever. Relationships are attempted to be fit into this budget of time. I don't have time for anything that would take too much energy. Who does? So friends with mental health problems are kind of a no-go. Yet I know very well that most people I know have some sort of mental health problem. I myself have mental health problems, and I empathize with feeling like you don't want to burden anyone with your broken self. But I also empathize with people not wanting to hear it, or not kind of having the time to hear it, even if they would have wanted to. Constantly thinking about what would be healthiest to do in this way. What is the best action that would have the most impact on my self-help hasn't led to much good for me. And you'd think that judging by the sheer size of the self-help industry and the magnitude of pathways that we now have to a better life, we'd all be better off today than we were 10, 20 years ago, but we're not. Purpose, goals, and ambitions are words that seem too positively loaded to ever really be questioned. It's hard to imagine that you'd advise a friend to stop working on themselves, but it certainly can be too much, and it begs a new question of what to do to try to solve the issue of stopping solving issues within yourself. How do you approach not entrepreneuring yourself? I find myself in a place where I now want to stop. I don't want to improve anymore. And it's a bit of a catch-22 because that requires some amount of self-work as well. But here I like using Simone Weil's philosophy of awareness by directing our awareness to the fact that a lot of self-help ideology rests on a false narration of freedom, but in fact works as an enclosure. We're already a lot further on the path away from the eternal toil of self-development.
Is there anything rougher than when you feel like you haven't progressed in a year?